Good morning, everybody. Today's Wednesday, May 6, 2020. I'm Ben Dryden. You're watching Dryden Wire Live. Adam Jarko is my very special guest today. I think we're going to be going over a lot of things. There's a lot that has happened since he was on a couple of weeks ago, doing some Supreme Court analysis, right? Thanks to both of my guests so far this week, 7th Congressional District candidate Senator Tom Tiffany and Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald. Tomorrow, of course, Diane Dryden will be chatting with Brittany from Embrace for her Diane's Kitchen. No, it's not a cooking show. And on Friday, I will be chatting with 63rd District Representative and Wisconsin Assembly Speaker Robin Vos. All right. We got a lot to get to today. Let's see if we can get our guest on. Attorney, business owner, and former Wisconsin Representative Adam Jarko. Joker, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. It's a beautiful day
What's
out.
new?
It's sunny. I'm just happy for that.
It is. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, there's nothing really going on at all, is there? I mean, what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah. As usual in Wisconsin, boring. No political intrigue, nothing.
Nope. I guess we'll just talk sports or something.
Yeah. Can we talk about the Cubs?
Sure. Oh, speaking of the baseball, actually, I get up at 4, and at 4:30 this morning on ESPN2 there was Korean baseball because it's live and nobody's in the stands. I'm like, are you kidding? This is what's really on. Of course, I watched it because I want to see some live sports. But hopefully, it'll be coming back soon.
It's better than soccer, right? Nothing's worse than soccer.
Oh my goodness. I don't know why that sport's so popular. Maybe I don't like it because I can't play it. I get winded after just walking a block. Well, I'm glad to have you back on. Last week you were off, so we've been kind of doing, having you on Wednesdays. But Senator Janet Bewley had been elected the Senate Minority Leader, so she asked to come on. So thank you. You were gracious to kind of give up your slot to have her on, but I love having you here. You're one of my favorite guests. You kind of hit that criteria, the big things on what makes a good show. So I'm glad to have you back, man.
Well, what makes a good show? You should let me know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong.
Well, really, when it comes to just like a show, at least for me, like I don't look at like how many people I don't compare how many people viewed one over the other and let that decide. Really, it's three things. It's be insightful over information. So anyone can just give information, but give us some insight. People like that have an opinion, even if it's a strong opinion. People want to know, what do you think? And then last, really just some humor. I think if you can do those three things in a show, it's a good show.
Well, I know I've never had an opinion on anything. I'm kind of a little bit of a wallflower.
Middle of the road kind of guy. Yeah. Hey, I asked before we get, because, man, we got to get to Supreme Court stuff and a whole bunch of things. And I know a lot's been going on over in Polk County recently. I asked Sheriff Fitzgerald yesterday, and I'll ask you, Tricia Zunker and Tom Tiffany had a debate at WPR on Monday night, I think. And neither of them would call each other by their name. They kept saying, my opponent, my opponent. There must be a political strategy here, right?
I don't know if there is. Maybe they just don't know what each other's names are.
They forgot.
For me, it was always interesting because when I ran, it was, what do you call somebody? Do you call them Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so? Do you call them by their first name? How do you not be disrespectful? And so probably it's just easier to call him my opponent, and then nobody except you whines about it.
It's funny. So my dad, when he was first sheriff, man, I was a kid. That was, I don't know, a long time ago. He would go to the restaurant for breakfast on a Saturday morning, and he would call people by their names, and he wouldn't get like most of the names right. So finally, my mom just told him, just say Guy. Like, hey, Guy, how you doing? So maybe that's that same idea. You don't want to forget. So Polk County, I saw two things in Polk County. One was just yesterday, but I think it was last week maybe. You were a part of this. Actually, you tell me what this is about. For the people who didn't see it, you wrote an amicus something, whatever. What was that about?
Yeah, so you're kind of mixing things. So the amicus brief was in the Supreme Court case, and maybe we'll hold that for a minute.
Okay.
What happened in Polk County, though, was really interesting. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of what my understanding of the backstory is. So middle of last week, a business in Polk County over in Amory was served with a cease and desist from the Polk County Health Department. And as you know, before all of this happened, the Polk County Sheriff had already made news by saying, I think this is unconstitutional. I'm not going to enforce this. And we'd kind of gotten word from Polk County that they kind of felt the same way. So I think it came as a surprise to a lot of people that a Polk County business received the cease and desist. And it caused a lot of backlash. And so the Polk County Board had an emergency meeting on Friday afternoon and passed a resolution that said two things. One, Governor Evers, this order is having a horrendous impact on our businesses, and we urge you to immediately start reversing course. And two, Polk County believes that businesses can start reopening in a safe manner, and here's how we think they can go about doing that. And so I think what a lot of people, including me, read that to mean is no more cease and desist coming out of Polk County, even if you're operating a business technically in violation of the order, because I think the Polk County Health Department now is kind of under the thumb of this resolution where unless you get wild and crazy and you have Woodstock out at your place, so long as you're following distancing and those sort of things, I think Polk County has said, we're not going to be in the business of enforcing this anymore. And then that was followed up with a letter, a very strongly worded letter from the Polk County Board Chairman on Monday to Governor Evers, laying all of this out and once again saying, Governor, this is really bad for businesses. All businesses are essential, and we need to get our county back to work. We cannot continue down this path. So Polk County, in my opinion, continues to lead the way out of the woods on this issue, and I'm really, really proud of our county board for what they've been doing here.
Well, you had 2 weeks ago when you were on, you had brought up the amicus things and what all that stuff meant. So we won't get back into all those things, but you had written something for the Sportsman, right? Hunter, what was it? Hunter Nation. That's something I had seen, and I saw that your name was on that.
Yep. So we did. And this was really fun for me. So I've been a lawyer for 15 years, but I do transactional work. So I help businesses, buy and sell each other or parts of their businesses or divisions. I kind of draft contracts. I do commercial real estate and estates and trusts. So I don't go to court very often. So I was asked by some friends that run some sportsmen's groups to write an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case.
Amicus.
And I took on that challenge.
I thought it was amicus.
Yeah, took on that challenge, did it pro bono, and we put in a brief that argued a number of things. But in my opinion, the coolest argument that we made was that the order violates the Wisconsin constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap. And we made that argument on behalf, in particular, of a group of sport fisher guides out over in kind of the Lake Michigan area, who their businesses have been shut down. And it's kind of crazy if you think about it. So the governor has said, get outside, go fishing. Fishing is allowed. We now have under a kind of a revised order where you can even rent a boat. And so in theory, these sport fishermen guide, they could rent their boat out to people to go fishing. They could even go on their boat with these people. But as soon as they engage in their guiding services, they're now a non-essential business and are shut down. And so we thought that because almost no one in Wisconsin is able to fish on Lake Michigan with their own equipment, their own boat, most people don't have a boat big enough or the expertise, that this actually violates the constitutional right to hunt and fish. So it was a fun argument to make, and it was a unique argument. And yesterday, the court, when they had their oral arguments, kind of thanked the parties that had put in amicus briefs and for kind of helping them to see the real life impact that this is having, put a face to the theoretical issues. And these people, if you think about these businesses in Wisconsin, they're kind of like a resort, right? They're only open for a few months, and if we don't get them back to work, they're going to lose everything. They're done. So
is there anything that comes from this other than just writing and stating an opinion? Is there any ruling on stuff like this?
For sure. Yep. So the briefs were due last week. Last brief went in on Thursday. That was the legislature's reply brief. And then shortly thereafter, the court set an oral argument, which happened yesterday. And I assume we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And now we're done. All the arguments are done.
Okay.
My strong suspicion is the court has already made their decision. Because yesterday, right after the oral arguments, they had a conference of the justices. And during that conference, that's when they would sort of take a straw poll among the 7 justices to determine, do we have 4 votes to either uphold the governor's order or to block the governor's order? And so there are 7 people plus their clerks in the state who already know, I assume, whether or not the order will be upheld. And it's just a matter of us sitting around waiting for them to issue that opinion.
Yeah. Why do you think, if that was already, if in that scenario they've already made their mind, why are we still waiting?
So if you've ever been involved in litigation, you know that it's incredibly slow. It's painstakingly slow. Sometimes it takes, I've been involved in cases for business clients that have taken years. So for a court to go from getting a complaint, a petition, to issuing a decision within a couple of weeks, I mean, that is literally lightning speed. It is incredible to see a court move that fast.
Okay.
And so the court this is a huge case, and it has significant downstream impacts on separation of powers, sort of the fundamental structure of the balance of power between the executive and the legislative branches. And so the court's going to want to get it right one way or the other in its opinion. And my guess is we'll have a divided court, even among the majority. So let's just say, for example, that the position that I would like to win does win. And that would mean that to some extent or some way, the order of the governor is blocked. It's unlikely that you will have an agreement among even the justices in the majority as to the reasoning. So some of them may want to say she being Andrea Palm, the DHS secretary, exceeded her statutory authority. Some of them would maybe want to say it's all unconstitutional. It violates various provisions of the Wisconsin Constitution. We'll talk a little bit about Justice Bradley's questioning on that issue, if you'd like. And then, of course, it's very unlikely, no matter which way the court goes, that there's going to be a unanimous opinion. So you're going to have a dissent. And so they go back and forth and write these opinions. They're doing case law research to put those into the opinions that they're writing. So it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm hopeful that maybe we'll see a decision this week, but it wouldn't shock me if it rolled into next week even.
So by the time that happens, I mean, we're getting closer to the already order. If it is the end of next week, how much of an impact that's going to have? Assuming that it's going to be that they're stating that Andrea Palm exceeded her authority. What does that look like then? And at this point, is it going to do anything if it's another week and a half until this announcement comes?
So keep in mind that it's not a light switch that goes on May, what was it, 24th, 26th,
Yeah.
whenever it's supposed to expire by itself. What's going to happen instead is that the governor's staff, the secretary of DHS, have said that they will start looking at reopening. And the position that the governor's staff took in the brief was really extraordinary. Essentially, it said, well, we could keep doing this for as long as we want, for as long as we feel like there's an emergency. So my answer is absolutely, this will have a huge impact, because it will be the beginning of the end one way or the other.
Okay.
Whereas, they could, in theory, without a ruling, extend this again and again and again.
Okay.
And so this would set the end date at least.
So I didn't get to watch the whole the arguments yesterday or the proceeding. I think I caught it like a half an hour into it, so I missed the first half hour. Did you watch it?
I did. Yeah, it was really interesting.
So I want to get some of your takeaways from it, but first, how do you think each side, their attorney, how do you think they did representing their argument?
So I thought both attorneys did just fine, to be honest with you. I think that the petitioner's attorney, his name is Ryan Walsh, and he works at a law firm down in Madison, but he's a Northwoods boy. He's actually from Burnett County, a graduate from Webster High School.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And yeah, man,
Cool.
It shows you that no matter where you're born or how you grow up, that you can kind of grow up to do whatever you want. And he's a young guy. He's like 30 years old, and he's already, made quite a mark for himself.
Wow.
But he put on a heck of a good case, I thought, did a really nice job. But in my opinion, he has a little bit of the easier case, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The DOJ attorney, his name is Colin Roth. He works for the Department of Justice, one of the kind of line attorneys or staff attorneys that works there. Mm-hmm. And he did fine as well. He has a much more difficult case to make for two reasons. One, we have kind of a conservative leaning court, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of general view of it is it's kind of a 5-2 court at the moment when Justice Kelly goes off in August and is replaced with the new Justice Karofsky, who just won in April. Mm-hmm. It'll be more of a 4-3 court. And that's kind of conventional wisdom. And they don't always, of course, fall along those ideological lines, but that's sort of the general breakdown, right?
Okay.
So he starts with a little bit of a disadvantage. And then he's in a position of arguing that, and I want to make sure that we're not mixing whether you think the stay-at-home order is the right policy or not, as opposed to what is allowed under the statutes or the Constitution. So we could all agree that this is the right policy and disagree whether the way that it was implemented was allowed. So the legislature says this could be allowed, to this kind of order, but it has to be done correctly, and that's through the procedures of adopting an emergency rule. And the reason the legislature wants that ability is because that means that the legislature is involved. So the government's case is, nope, we don't need to involve the legislature at all. So long as we declare an emergency, we have the absolute authority to issue this kind of order, and we can keep it in place for as long as we want. Well, that's a really hard case to make. I mean, we have all grown up in this idea that we have separation of powers and checks and balances, and the legislature makes the law and the executive executes the law. I mean, we all learned this in fourth grade, right? And so he had a very tough case to make. I think the governor, the way they structured the order, put themselves in a little bit of a box. And I'm not exactly sure from a political perspective why, after 2 months, the governor hasn't kind of involved the legislature more and gone through the rulemaking process, but they haven't. And so he's in a very difficult position, and he was getting hammered by the justices during the questioning phase of the oral argument. I mean, just absolutely hammered.
I think that's when I came in.
It was rough.
Yeah. Yeah, the first one, Ryan Walsh had just finished. That's when I turned it on. So I didn't see what that was like. But boy, yeah, the other one, it's like, holy cow, they're just destroying this guy. I mean, man.
And so the interesting part, Ben, is that the legislature's case is sort of this technical case about whether we followed the Chapter 227 rulemaking process and whether emergency order number 28, the stay-at-home order, is actually a rule. And if it is, did they go through the right process? So Justice Rebecca Bradley, there's two Bradleys on the court. Justice Rebecca Bradley started her questioning of DOJ Attorney Roth, absolutely hammering him by saying something like, I'm going to paraphrase here, where in the Wisconsin Constitution can I find the provision that allows one unelected cabinet secretary to tell 6 million people that they have to stay home and they can't go to work and they have to shut down their businesses? And if they don't do that, they are subject to criminal fines. Where can I find that in the Wisconsin Constitution? Isn't that, and this is her words, isn't that the very definition of tyranny? And I think that question was so strong, and to some extent, based on the arguments in the brief, so unexpected that it immediately put him back on his heels. And it was a rough road the whole way for him.
And that's I was going to ask you some of your takeaways. That was my biggest one, at least from what I had watched, was that line of questioning, because I had never thought about that before. I think, though, Roth had said, he kind of gave an analogy later on regarding, like, if there was a fire and police have to, close down a few streets and you can't go in there. So I think he made some good analogies. How strong do you think that was to kind of, for him to put those things into perspective? Do you think those are, is it a juxtaposition? Is it, it's an analogy, so it can't be exact, but was that legitimate?
I think, again, he did the best he could with the facts and the law that he had to work with.
Sure.
But I actually think the wildfire analogy falls right into the legislature's hands and right into their argument, because the legislature is arguing that when you promulgate an order that covers the entire state and everybody in the state, that is necessarily what's called in the statute a general order of general application. And that means it's a rule. And if it's a rule, that means it has to go through the rulemaking process. What he was trying to say is, we don't have time for this because this is a pandemic. We can't go through this. If there's a wildfire, the fire chief has to be able to close certain roads and evacuate people and whatever. So you don't do that in the whole state, though, Ben, right? You don't do that to everybody in the state.
Sure.
You find out where the fire is, kind of in what township or what county or what part of what county, and the fire chief targets that very small area, and they put in fire breaks and they evacuate people. And so that clearly is an order, right? Because it's a tiny little area of just a few people, just a few homes, just a few roads. You juxtapose that against the order that we have today that covers everybody in the entire state indefinitely. And I think he actually inadvertently kind of walked right into a trap that the legislature had laid for him.
See, great insight. See what I'm talking about, man. Insight. See, I didn't think about that because when he said it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. That's a good argument.
Well, and what he and in fairness to him, what has Dr. Fauci equated this to? He's called it potentially a wildfire, the COVID-19. He has kind of said it could spread like a wildfire. So I think Attorney Roth was picking up on that language, but unfortunately, the analogy part of it, I think, kind of. So if I'm writing the opinion for the court and we decide that we're doing it on the rule issue, I'm going to grab that analogy and kind of throw it back at him and say, you even gave us an example of what an order would look like. And an order is small in scale, small in area, targeted. This order that we have today in front of the court, number 28, is huge. Goes across the whole state forever for everybody indefinitely.
Someone asked me yesterday, and I think I gave him a relatively close answer, but I'd rather ask you and have your insight on this. Well, why didn't Evers just order this and not have it go through the DHS? Could he have done that?
So if you remember, we're on order number 2, right? So we had the original stay-at-home order that came out on, I don't know, March 17th or something. And it was to extend through April 24th. And then about a week before that was to expire, or 2 weeks before it was to expire, they issued a new order. And that's the order that we're under today, order number 28. And that's the one that extended it until after Memorial Day. In the original order, it was a joint order between the governor relying on his emergency powers and the secretary of DHS relying on her powers under the statute. Under the new order, they've gotten rid of all reference to the governor's emergency powers. And I strongly suspect that happened because on May 11th, his emergency powers under the statute expire. He's got 60 days, and that expires on May 11th, but he wanted the order to extend until after Memorial Day.
Got it.
And so they took out the governor's powers and said, oh, we're just relying on the statutory authority that that DHS has, and that can last forever. Well, of course, that gets to questioning from the court that says, how can it be the case that the legislature, in giving the governor emergency powers, said, not only can we, the legislature, revoke that power at any time by a joint resolution, they could anytime during that 60 days, but if we don't, it automatically expires at the 60th day. How can it be the case that the legislature has said the governor's powers are limited like that, but has said that the secretary of DHS can extend that power forever indefinitely? And I think, again, very, very tough question for DOJ to answer.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Yeah. I'm sure you saw that, Voss, when you were on here a couple weeks ago, and I think even the week before that, I'd asked, how would you like to see this get resolved? And you had said it's going to either go to the Supreme Court, or what really needs to happen is Fitzgerald and Voss need to sit down with Evers and that team, and they need to figure something out. Mm-hmm. Well, a couple days ago, I think, they did that. Or I know at least Voss said, I can't remember who was all in that meeting, and it seemed like a positive thing, right? And is this all show, or do you think they are starting to communicate more now?
A little of both, to be honest with you. So you'll remember when the legislature filed the lawsuit, the legislature asked the court to do two things. Number one, stop the order. That's called an injunction. Enjoin the order. However, court, we would like you to stay your injunction for 6 days. In other words, we want the court to say this order exceeds the statutory authority of the secretary and it's struck down, but we're going to let it stay in effect for 6 days. And the idea of the 6 days was that would give the legislature and the governor time to get together and negotiate and put together an emergency rule. And interestingly, they went through this kind of emergency rule analysis in the oral arguments yesterday, and it turns out that it'll take 10 to 12 days to promulgate an emergency rule. And the legislature's attorney bemoaned the fact that the governor's office hasn't started that process yet. So even though they've started to have meetings now, they haven't started the emergency rule process, which starts by promulgating what's called a scope statement. And so, go ahead.
No, please finish.
Yeah, and so I think some of it is for show, because if the governor was really serious about sort of changing horses here and going to an emergency rule, they would have already promulgated a scope statement. But what I'm afraid might be going on here is we're getting to the place that now we want to point fingers.
And what? That never happens.
Right? That's the first time I've ever politics. That the governor thinks that it's quite possible that the court will take some action to cease or stop the order, and that he can now blame the right-wing court and the right-wing legislature for anything bad that happens here. And so maybe that they're not in a mood to negotiate an emergency rule. I hope that's not true,
sure.
Because as I've said before, I think that this virus is a real thing and can be very dangerous, particularly for older people and people who are sick, and that we ought to take some precautions here, and that there's a way that we can smartly reopen. And so I think just turning the light switch is probably not the absolute best thing that we could do here. Mm-hmm. That a reopening that is negotiated in a bipartisan way between the legislature and the governor is probably the best thing for the whole state. We could all get behind that. I'm becoming a little more skeptical as the days go by that that's actually going to happen. And what is likely to happen is either the court upholds the order and the governor just can continue doing this, or the court strikes it down and there's not a deal and we just reopen.
Well, Evers had his radio broadcast last, I think, Thursday, had said in there that he wanted to, he's ready to put partisanship behind and, meet and do this. And then, of course, they did have something. Assuming for a moment it's not just all for show, right? Or that's not a motivating factor here. Now that this is the arguments yesterday happened, is he last night or to morning, he's waking up going, okay, yeah, we need to really actually get together and do something because I don't want the worst case scenario. I think you would kind of mention that before, where it's maybe he or could possibly, this would be in the partisanship of having the worst case scenarios, so then he could just blame, the other side. Do you think that's what he really wants?
I certainly hope not. I'm for whatever reason always optimistic about our political leaders that deep down inside, most of them have our best interests at heart, even if we disagree with them. And so I'm certainly hopeful that is not the case. But I've also always said, or at least for as long as I can sort of remember in my adult life, said, don't listen to what the politicians say. Look at what they actually do. And so if they were serious, they would have already begun the process of issuing a scope statement and starting the rulemaking process. And that's not happened yet, and it's unfortunate.
I think both sides are losing right now. There is not a winner here at all. I think most people, at least that I talk to, think the same way that of what you just said, would agree with exactly what you just said, that Wisconsin, this isn't helping us. And one side is helping this, and on the other side, it's hurting this. But there is a way that we can do this together. And I think at this point, people are just starting to get a little ticked off.
Yeah, and I've sensed that even from my sort of more conservative or Republican friends, that they're upset with members of the legislature. And part of why they're upset is they feel like like the legislature hasn't taken that definitive step of revoking the emergency powers. And I have kind of said, I get that. I get that sense and sort of the visceral wanting to do that, to take that stand. And maybe remember that Andrea Palm has not been confirmed yet. And so in theory, the Senate could essentially fire her, not confirm her. And people have called for that. And I kind of get the sort of visceral or emotional response there. But at the end of the day, Governor Evers would just put somebody else in there that will do this. Yeah. So getting rid of her makes no difference, in my opinion. And even if we revoke the emergency powers, the governor is still going to take the position that I didn't need the emergency powers. This was done under the DHS statute. And so you end up in court anyway. And so I've said, I think the legislature is actually doing exactly the only thing that it is able to do at the moment. And I've gotten yelled at from some of my conservative friends for taking that position and defending the sort of the strategy that Senator Fitzgerald and Speaker Vos have employed. But I think actually from a realistic standpoint, they're doing the only thing that they can do in their position, and that's to get the court to intervene. That's going to be the definitive answer here, is once the court intervenes.
What are all of the possible outcomes from this?
So I'll start with the two ends of the spectrum, right? So on one end, the court could say she has this authority, case dismissed, period. And Governor Evers just gets to do what he wants to do, and the legislature can, complain and whine about it all they want, but it's over. On the other end of the spectrum, the court could say this order is either unconstitutional or it exceeds the statutory authority, and it's ceased right now, immediately. And there was actually, I was surprised, Justice Roggensack, who is oftentimes seen as kind of a swing, kind of a middle vote, more conservative to be sure, but, a little bit more cautious. She really questioned Attorney Roth yesterday on, and even Attorney Walsh on, why shouldn't we just, if we find that this is beyond the authority, shouldn't we just stop it right now? Why should we give them additional time? Why is that the right thing to do? And I was surprised by that questioning. So that's possible that the court could just say, hey, this order is out, and the light switch goes back on. I assume at that point, then the legislature would pass some legislation, some reopening type legislation that would kind of walk that back, but it'd be pretty messy. And then I think the most likely scenario is that the court will do something in the middle and kind of what the legislature has asked it to do, which is put this order on hold, but do it in a way that gives the legislature a seat at the table and doesn't throw everything into chaos. And so I think that's going to be the most likely outcome, but who knows?
Is there a scenario, is it possible at this point, excuse me, if the legislature and Evers, so the GOP and everyone, they all get together and they start having that conversation, and you know what, we're going to work together now, just waving a magic wand here. Is it too late to stop the train when it comes to the Supreme Court?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's possible that if a deal was worked out immediately, that the legislature and the governor's staff could essentially ask the court in a joint petition to dismiss the case. I suspect that they could do that. I don't think it'll happen. I think it's very unlikely that will happen. I think the train is too far down the tracks, and both parties have their position, and we're going to wait to see what the court says, I suspect, is what's happening.
So what impact, if any, yesterday's Supreme Court get together, and we have a May 12th election coming up. Is it too late to stop the May 12th election in any way, or to take any action on that, or because of yesterday and it's going to be a while, that it's too late to do anything now? May 12th election is on as is.
I strongly suspect that it's on as is. I haven't seen any of those kind of indications out of the governor's office like we saw before the April election that they're going to make a change. I mean, if you were paying attention that week before the April election, you could tell exactly what the governor was doing, and he was setting it up to promulgate an order to try to change the election. I haven't seen any of that this week, and I don't really expect to see it. In fact, his attorney, weeks ago had said, well, northern Wisconsin is different, and it's less crowded, and we think we can do this, and more absentee ballots. So in theory, the governor could try to change it. And actually, interestingly, I think the governor has more authority to try to change this election date than the other election date, because he's the one that set this election date under his powers because Sean Duffy resigned, whereas the other election date was set by statute. So I think he's got a better argument on this election, but I actually don't think from what I can see, I don't think he's going to try to change it.
And you kind of think that if he was going to, he would have done it by now, right?
One would think, but remember, he didn't change the last election until the Monday before.
Yeah, it was the day. Oh, it was the day before, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. He did it on a Monday, and the election was supposed to be on a Tuesday.
Yeah, and that created a lot of confusion.
It was a mess.
I think we may have talked about that a couple weeks ago. That I saw people, someone say, "Hey, I voted," and you see a comment, "Wait, we can vote?" It's like, oh no. So that was really disappointing. Hey man, what else do you want to talk about that we didn't get a chance to get to?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about? We did baseball. We did the Supreme Court case. We did Polk County. What's happening in Barron County? Anything good? How's Fitzgerald doing?
Fitzy? Yeah, he's great. I love talking to him. I really do. Because he is, like we were talking earlier, he does the three things. Some humor, some insight, and he'll answer any question. He will. He's fair. He's thoughtful. He's a genuinely nice person, and he's a genuinely positive person. Some people are just kind of fake all the time, and I don't know. I like him. I like him a lot. I really do.
What do you think? Are we going to have a Congressman Tiffany or a Congresswoman Zunker? What's your prediction?
Oh boy, I don't really. Well, we put up a Facebook poll a couple days ago, and I think it was leaning towards Tiffany, but it's a Facebook poll, right? I mean, that's not even close to even. I don't even know if you'd call that a straw poll. It's just a Facebook poll. I think that simply because how he did in the election in the 7th Congressional District, our area, and how Duffy did. I think it's going to be hard for Tricia to win on Tuesday. That's just if I had to guess, I would say Tiffany would win. But honestly, I think just by very little. I don't think it's going to be maybe as big as some people are suggesting it would be. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if she won. I guess the bigger question is going to be, now what do we do this fall? Because it almost like it doesn't really matter on Tuesday. No, it certainly does. But they're just going to be doing this again in August. Technically November. I mean, I don't know about the primary in August. Anyone's going to run there, but we just have a chance to do it all over again.
And this happened actually 2 years ago or so. There was a vacancy in the state Senate over in the Green Bay area. And a Democrat ended up winning in a special election about this time of year. And it took a Republican seat, or a seat that had been held by a Republican who had been, I think, went to the Walker administration or something like that. And so the Democrat won very narrowly. I don't think the Senate actually ever went into session while he had been elected.
Oh, right.
And then in the fall election, it was basically a rematch, and the Republican won the seat back. And so I think you're right, Ben, that no matter who wins here, and I tend to agree with you. It's a conservative-leaning seat nowadays,
right.
And I think the fundamentals probably favor Tom, and Tom's run a pretty good campaign. So I suspect that Tom will likely win, but to some extent, it doesn't matter all that much. There'll be a rematch in November.
Yeah, kind of right. So actually, tell all of us, give us some insight here, buddy. This is the special election, so there's nothing else on the ballot.
Right.
Does that favor one party or an upset challenger, or is that helping or hurting either candidate? That this is.
I think it helps Zunker tremendously, because I don't think there's anybody who believes that when Donald Trump is on the ballot in November, and you can hate Donald Trump and despise him and think he's the most awful human and we'd never vote for him, but he is going to win the 7th Congressional District in November. I mean, there is no doubt. No, there's not a human alive that thinks Donald Trump is going to lose the 7th Congressional District. And so with him on the ballot, he's going to drive a huge amount of kind of conservative or Republican voters out to vote in the 7th. Whereas right now, there is no such thing. And so there is no such driving force. And this race has kind of been buried underneath of the coronavirus situation.
Right.
And I talked to Tom the other day, and I frankly said, I'm not sure how many people actually know there's even an election coming up, right?
Right.
So, I think the current environment benefits Zunker tremendously.
Okay, well, I'm changing my answer then. Is it too late? I'm going to say then that Trisha, you sold me. You're a great salesman. That Trisha will win. Trisha Zunker will win on Tuesday, and then Tiffany will win in November. How about that?
I think you were right the first time. I think Tom's going to win, but it's going to be somewhat narrow. And then in the fall, he's going to win by 10, 15 points.
All right, well, so the election's on, as of now, next Tuesday. You'll be here on Wednesday, so we'll be able to see. So I'm going to say Trisha is going to win, but by a little.
Okay.
You're saying Tom's going to win. So we'll see. I don't think it's legal.
If Tom loses, he will join my very exclusive club of losing red seats in special elections.
What?
So we will have Tom on, and you can mock both of us.
Well, I don't think he's going to quit politics when he loses, though.
No, I think that's right.
All right. Well, we'll have to put something on this. We'll have to talk about that. That whoever. So I'm going to Zunker on Tuesday. You're going. I mean, not saying voting or telling people who to vote for. I don't care. Vote for whoever you want.
Should we put something on it?
Yeah,
or
we
want
should.
To put a stake on it.
Yeah,
or something?
yeah, we should. I don't know what, but I don't know. We'll have to figure. We'll have to think about that.
Right.
Maybe on next week's show, next Wednesday when you come back on, the other person has to. You have to have a pre-written statement on how wise the other person is in the foresight of.
That sounds fair. I'd rather have a stake, but I'll take a statement of you saying how wise I am.
All right. Maybe we'll have to do a stake later.
All right.
Next time I come over. All right, cool. Anything else, man? Anything else going on?
No, man.
I love having you on, dude.
All right.
Absolutely do. Thank you so very much. We'll be paying attention to the election on Tuesday, and I'll be looking forward to hearing your speech that you're going to give me next Wednesday. I can't wait. Special thank you to my guest today, attorney, business owner, and former Wisconsin representative, Adam Jarchow, and thank all of you for watching. We'll see you right back here tomorrow morning when Diane Dryden will be chatting with Brittany Olson from Embrace on Diane's Kitchen. So until then, stay safe, keep your social distance, and have a blessed day.